So it is 4:30 a.m. and I just got up and I'm blinding myself with this headlamp just so you guys can see me. Still laying in my sleeping quilt and just making some coffee right now, waiting for it to finish brewing. And then I'm gonna head down and see if there's a clearing where I saw that peak yesterday, and hopefully there's some clouds sitting up over it, but you can actually see the mountains. So it's about 20 minutes before sunrise right now. And you can see they're starting to get a little bit of color back in those peaks. Those were completely socked in last night. Our camp is right back behind that bend. Really pretty morning out, but it looks like I had complete cloud cover last night and no clouds at all today. So I'm gonna take this shoot to really test out this Nikon Z30, because anytime I get a new camera, whether it's a full frame or a small crop sensor like this, there's a few things I need to do. I need to test the dynamic range of the camera. I need to test how it handles with exposed to the right, meaning if I expose all the way to the right and a little over on my Z7 full frame camera, it's actually perfectly exposed to the right on the RAW file because the back of the camera is showing a JPEG file. So I need to test out how far I can push exposed to the right on this camera without clipping the RAW file. The other thing I need to test is the ISO. How does it handle at high ISO? Where do I start to see that? And this is actually the perfect scenario for testing this camera because it's very low light and it's gonna be long exposures. So I can test the ISO, I can test exposed to the right, and I can test how it handles long exposures. Sometimes on cheaper cameras, when you push the long exposures, the image quality isn't as good. This is a $600 camera setup. So far, it's been handling really well. There's some downsides though, right? Because this is the 16 to 50 lens. So full frame equivalent, that's like 22 or 3 or 4 or something. So it's not that wide. So what I really have this camera for is for trips where I'm really pushing miles deep into wilderness, and I still want to take my camera, but with 10 days of food, it's too hard to carry my 7.5 pound camera, do big miles, and still get into these spots. But I use this shorter trip, we're only out here for 4 days, and I wanted to test this camera so I know the maxes and mins of it before I take it out on a big trip. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I just have this vertical shot set up. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test at base ISO exposed to the right and then a little over. So you can see my histogram there, I'm exposed to the right. You guys can check out my ETTR video. Just go into YouTube and type in Dave Morrow ETTR, or type it into my channel, and it'll come up and teach you how to expose to the right and why it's the best for image quality. It'll drastically improve your images with this one quick switch of exposure. So this is pushed all the way to the right. It looks to me like the blue is gonna blow out here a little bit, but I wanna push this overboard just slightly. So exposure compensation, that's touching. Now I'm gonna go 1, 2 thirds of a stop over. That gives me an 8-second shutter speed. So this is gonna let me know, even though the JPEG's clipped, if that RAW file at home is clipped, and we can take a look at some of these. So when we look at this, you can see it's clipped on the RGB and it's clipped on all the other channels. So here is the RAW file on my screen, and you can see it's almost clipping here for the color channels, but it's not clipped. I have the clipping turned on right here. But one thing to keep in mind for your camera is it's showing the JPEG rendering of the RAW file on the back of the screen. So this is why I need to do this test, because this was not a blown out image. You'll see on my profile here in RAW, it says Adobe Color. What I recommend to you guys is go to Browse here. And under Browse, you'll have all these different options. Under Camera Matching, you'll have these options such as Flat or Neutral. If you pick Flat and you use all your editing on Flat, this is going to show the actual closest thing to the RAW file on the screen with no presets applied to it. What your camera shows is something more like landscape, where it's going to clip it down. So within your camera settings, you can also go onto Picture Profiles. It's called something like that across different varying cameras. And you want to set that to the flattest or most neutral one possible, because you want the back of your camera screen to show the histogram that's as close to the RAW file as possible. And it's going to show the histogram that matches whatever your preset is the camera applies to it. Notice how this shifts. So I have my import preset for RAW, and it's automatically going to import all my RAW files like this with some standard adjustments right here.
So you might still be thinking to yourself, well, it looks like I've clipped the blue channels up here because it's starting to wash out to white. But you notice if I pull the highlights down and the exposure down, I didn't actually clip the colors up here. It's completely fine. Now, the real reason that you want to expose to the right and find this max limit is that if I pull up the exposure here, notice how much dark detail I have in this image. And I can double and triple process a single raw file to get the same thing that I would get by taking multiple exposures out in the field and blending them together. The reason why this is nice is because there's no noise in this single raw file. I can use it for the shadows. I can use it for the highlights. And even on this crop sensor camera that's $600, look how much data is in this single raw file. So there's no need to take multiple exposures for high dynamic range scenes in a lot of circumstances. You just need to test first and find out the limits of your camera.
The next thing I want to do is I'm just going to expose to the right here. So that's exposed to the right for the blue channel. And now I'm going to start pushing the ISO up. I call this max usable ISO. You want to know it for every camera you own. Max usable ISO means it's not the ideal ISO, right? ISO at base, for this camera it's 100, for my Z7 it's 64. That's going to give you the best dynamic range for the raw file. If you drop below that, say some cameras have like sub ISOs, like ISO 64 goes down to low 1, low 2, and low 3 on my Z7. Those will make you have less, they call it signal to noise ratio, right? So at the bottom of each pixel well, you have a little bit of inherent noise even at base ISO. If you start dropping to even lower values of ISO, like on some cameras, the amount of noise in the bottom of each pixel will even be less. And the goal here is amplification. So when you shoot at base ISO, you have no signal amplification. Signal is just the amount of light that you captured in each pixel. You guys can check out all my PDFs that I have free downloads for below this. It talks about all the technical details. But what you're doing here with the signal, when you're increasing ISO, you're not increasing the sensitivity of the camera sensor like a lot of people say. That's completely wrong. All you're doing is amplifying the signal or the amount of light captured in each pixel. So when I go from base ISO up one stop in ISO, for this camera it'd be from ISO 100 to 200. That would just be an amplification of the signal, but it's also going to amplify the noise. So you get double the signal, one stop increase, so the image will be double the amount of light, so-called light, because it's just amplifying it, but it's also going to amplify the amount of noise in the pixel well. So every time you amplify with a stop of ISO increase, you're going to amplify the signal, the image will get brighter, but you're also going to amplify that noise. And for each camera, I want to know, in the worst case scenario, how high can I push my ISO in low light conditions where it's increasing or amplifying that signal, but it's also amplifying the noise. How bad does it get before I'm like, okay, this is an unusable image even with noise reduction and post-processing? And if you don't know this with your camera, you're going to be scared to shoot at high ISOs. I'll shoot at ISO 800 on my Z7, no problem. So that's a little background on that. Like I said, check out PDFs. They'll give you a really good idea of it. So all I'm going to do here, I'm going to grab my ISO. I'm just going to go a stop at a time. So you can see what this is doing. I'm going from base ISO to ISO 200. Watch the shutter speed. It's at 1 second now. Now it's at a half a second. So my camera is amplifying that signal by 2. It's doubling it, meaning I need half the amount of light in the image. Now I wouldn't really need for this image to use ISO, but I'm just testing the raw files here. Because if I test my raw files at 200, 400, 800, so on and so forth, I can look at them on the computer and be like, okay, well, where does this get too nasty for me to fix the image?
So let's take a look at the raw files that I just took. So the first one I took is at ISO 200. Then I have 400, 800, 1600, and 3200. Now I brightened all these up so you can just see the shadows a lot more. Always remember the noise in the image is going to show up in the shadows. It's not going to show up as much in the highlights because there's high signal in the highlights. It's going to show up where the noise is amplified. So for the 200 one, if we zoom in on the shadows here, you can see there is definitely more noise than that first image that we took at base ISO or ISO 100. You can see really what's going on here. So I still wouldn't mind shooting at this ISO. I did pull the exposure up a lot, so if you pull the exposure down to where it would be, you really can't see too much of the noise. Notice how in the highlights, like right in here, you can barely see the noise at all. So if we go up to this next one, ISO 400, let's look at the difference here between these at about the same exposure. So this is 200, that's 400. Definitely a lot more noise. If we go down to the highlights, there's less noise than in the shadows, but there's starting to be some noise. So at 400, this camera's starting to get a little worse. If we look at 800, it's getting pretty noisy back there. So if I scroll back up to this one, this is 400, that's 800, it's a lot worse. But even in the highlights down here, it's starting to show up, but still not as bad as in the shadows. So of course, beyond that, these are really going to fall apart. The noise is getting terrible at 1600. Even on my my Z7, it's going to get really bad there. So I would say my max usable ISO for this one is 800 in a pinch, where it would be worth it having some noise if I had to make the shutter speed fast enough so I wouldn't get image shake. Because if you have a image that's not sharp because the shutter speed's not fast enough, you can't use an unsharp image. You can use noise reduction on an image like this. So ideally, I want to shoot ISO or base ISO of 100. I could push it up to 800 on this camera. 400 is going to be all right as well. So between 400 and 800 is going to be the max usable ISO for this one.
So some things to keep in mind here. When you do this test, expose to the right first, because then you're going to get the most signal, meaning the most amount of light captured in each pixel, and the ISO is going to amplify that signal for you. The last experiment I want to do is I want to drop this down back to base ISO, and I want to test how this does if I severely underexpose it. So technically, increasing the signal in the camera with ISO and increasing the signal at home with exposure is very similar. I'll show you guys on the computer in a little bit. But let's drop. We'll make it easy as a start here. Let's start at -1 exposure value. You can see it right there. Let's drop to -2 exposure value. That's a one-stop decrease in light. You can see when I do that, the shutter speed is going to drop too. So let's drop the exposure values. Now let's go to -2 exposure value. We're going to go from 2 to -3. Another one-stop decrease in light. So you can see this is very similar to ISO, right? Because if I wanted to use this exposure, for example, -3 ISO, the histogram's pushed way over. I could shoot it dark like this, and I could increase the signal using the exposure slider in my Camera Raw or my Lightroom application. That would be very similar to increasing the signal with ISO in the field.
So here are the images: -2 exposure value, -3 exposure value, -4 exposure value. Notice if I take this -2 exposure value and I start to pull up the exposure to expose for all the darks in here, it's starting to get the same amount of noise as that ISO 200 image. This is why exposed to the right is so important, because it's all about the amount of light that you capture in each pixel well. If you go to this one, severely underexposed, right? You can see it's getting extremely noisy. So if you underexpose your images, it's just as bad as using a really high ISO. So I always just shoot higher ISOs in the field because I know my max usable ISO from that previous test. Now if we go to this one and we start to pull it up, we might have to even use shadows. This is going to be like the ISO 1600. It completely falls apart down here. So even underexposing the image by 2 stops for this Z6, or for this Z30 I should say, it's going to show a lot of noise in the image. So you want to make sure you're exposed to the right for every single image first, and then if your shutter speed's not fast enough for the particular image, check out all my PDFs on this, my aperture priority mode guide, my shutter speed guide, they're all down below. But pick the shutter speed you need for the particular image, expose to the right first, and then just push your ISO up if you need to obtain a specific shutter speed. If not, you don't need to increase your ISO at all.
They're both doing the same thing. They're just amplifying the amount of light in each pixel. When you're dragging that exposure slider in RAW, it's amplifying or removing the amount of signal in each pixel well. If you're dragging it right, it's amplifying the signal. If you're dragging it left from 0, it's decreasing the signal. So the upside of doing it with ISO in the field is you can actually see the image, because if I were to shoot really underexposed like this in the field, I can't really see what's going on. In my image review, everything's black, so I can't see if the image is sharp or anything else. If you don't know the maxes and mins of your camera, meaning how far you can push it in each direction, you're gonna be out here shooting sometime when the light is actually good, and you're gonna be like, well, what's this thing do on the maxes and mins? I have no idea. And if you don't know your tools, you just can't take good photos.
So the next goal for today is to hike up this valley and try to get right up underneath those mountains. I don't really know what the snow level is right now, so a lot of times there's huge rivers coming down that drain into this river, and there'll be snow bridges and they get real sketchy. So we're gonna try to get up there as far as possible, but I wanna get a shot right into those peaks right there for sunrise or sunset. So I need to scout that out. And I'm also hoping, because the weather report says there's gonna be some clouds later in the day, so I can scout it, but maybe I'll also be able to do some black and white photography up there. So let's go. So we've been winding our way up this valley above camp, getting higher and higher. See, the peaks are starting to open up, and there's perfect clouds for black and white photography. See how that light gets dappled on all those ridge lines? Looks really nice. So there's the river we're camped on, and we've just been falling up this way, but I want to try to get an opening so I can shoot these peaks, ideally a little bit higher. I don't know how long it's going to be until we hit snow. We're up about 2,400 feet in gain right now. There's the other peak that you guys could see yesterday when I was hiking into the valley, but I'm surprised there's not more snow up here right now. So we'll see what this trail does. Hopefully there'll be an opening. I mean, that was kind of an opening, but I was looking up at the peak. I'm gonna be looking more across at it, so ideally get a little bit higher. So I finally found a spot where it opened up and I get a shot off. Usually I wouldn't stop and take this shot, but I really want to keep testing this Z30 just to see all the different image attributes and different shooting conditions. So why I'm taking this one is because we have really bright right up in those snow-capped peaks, and then this tree right here really dark. So this is a good circumstance where I can expose to the right, and then I can see how much shadow detail I get in the very clamped down darks. So with my Nikon Z7, this would handle this no problem, but I have no clue how this will handle it. So I'm just gonna focus back here on the peak and then dial my circular polarizer. And I just wanna make sure the shutter speed's fast enough just to capture those. So let's fire one off here.
So the reason I'm taking this image is because I can expose to the right with a lot of signal in the scene, meaning a whole lot of light. It's a bright sunny day, it's hitting these white snow-capped peaks. And then I can see when I'm exposed to the right, how much dark detail I can get in the extreme shadows, and if I need to take multiple exposures. Now, remember the branches were moving around in this scene. And like I said, I would never actually take this shot. I don't like the composition, but if the branches are moving around, if we need to take multiple exposures, it's impossible to blend them together because the branches won't overlap exactly in the scene. So sometimes you need to take one exposure and double process or triple process for the highlights and the shadows, a single raw file. I do this all the time using smart objects in Photoshop. So if I grab this one, I can pull this up and I can take a look at the shadows here. Now there is some noise. There's a lot of moss here, so it's very detailed. It's hard to depict what's moss and what's noise, but you would want to pull the exposure up just enough so you can see the details in the shadows like they would be if you naturally blended these shots together. And I think this is very usable. So even if I expose to the right, I still get lots of shadow detail. If I pulled it up here, of course I'm going to start to see a little bit of noise, especially right in here, but I would never pull the shadows up this bright so they're as bright as the highlights. So if you balance this back out, and you pull the highlights down and the shadows down, somewhere like that, you can still get plenty of detail. Now, if you didn't have enough detail, you would just process this entire image just for the highlights, for the peaks, everything else, however you wanted to do it. And then you would open that up in Photoshop, and then you would open another layer with the same raw file, and you would just process this raw file just for the shadows, just so they look nice. And then you can just use luminosity mask and blend them together. So now that I know for this camera, if I expose to the right on a bright day and there's something in the extreme clamped down shadows, even as far down as right here, I can still recover that dark detail to get it to look natural in the final edit. Now, always keep an eye out for things like this that are black. They're probably very close to black in the field, so don't always feel like you have to pull out all the shadow detail. It can make the image look really unnatural.
So we got up about another mile, and then we got stopped by endless snow fields and post holing. It's right back in there, but you can see that peak I was shooting earlier now. We're back down low now, but all the clouds are gone. So we're gonna follow the river back down to our base camp. It's about 4 miles down that way. And then maybe, depends if the light's good. You can see the sun's really high in the sky right now. About the worst time of day for shooting. Forest photography, ideally you want some light cloud cover so you have that diffuse light, or fog, ideally. But if it's like this, once the sun gets back way over here, it will hit this other side. It'll reflect off of that, and the trees over here will get really nice side lighting. So that's one thing I figured out over the years of shooting out here, is that even if you have bright sun like that, you want to use that reflective light. So let's say you find a really cool area. Let's say you wanted to shoot over here. You would actually want to wait till the sun gets back over here, and then it's going to reflect off there and hit. We're back here checking out this hemlock tree. What is this? A western hemlock?
World record, biggest western hemlock.
The world record biggest western hemlock.
15 miles one way, shortest distance to get here.
So we just got back to camp from hiking all day and spent the last half an hour collecting firewood. Just got a really good fire ripping. But if you look behind me, see that's where those mountain peaks are. You can barely see them, but it's completely clear tonight. So last night it was socked in, tonight it's clear. Got nothing on the sunset or sunrise, but got that really good forest shot that I'm excited about. And I got dinner waiting for me and this fire going, so time to go hang out by the fire, enjoy the relaxing night.